I was doing a panel discussion for the RCC, and on the 24th of February, I was talking about disruption, and Michael LeBlanc, who was hosting it, said, well, who would have thought war would have broken out? And in light of that and various press conversations I had, I actually added another 2 years. So I think we're going to be in this confused state, this area of unprecedented, dare I use the word, of disruption for another 2 years. So we better get used to it. This is a new normal, and I would argue the new normal happened probably around March 2020, maybe before that.
Thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm an award-winning strategic advisor and delivery executive. I'm focused on the rapid transformation of disrupted supply chain performance across the make, move, sell flow of consumer products and services from production to porch and assembly floor to shelf. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt, and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available from my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check these out. As the business world faces significant volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, business leaders looking to drive market-leading performance need to be tapping into thought leaders, strategic advisors, and implementation executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations, together with a strong track record of transitioning enterprises to become more agile, innovative, and digital. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started.
My name is Gary Newbury. I'm an award-winning strategic advisor and delivery executive focused on the rapid transformation of disrupted supply chain performance across the end-to-end retail supply chain and the last mile. If I had more time, I'd ask people to offer an explanation of what a supply chain is, but I'm going to go straight for the killer blow and suggest it's anything involved with adding value to the ultimate consumer in moving a thing, a resource or transportation, whatever it might be, from point A to point B. So it is that whole gambit of activity from, in grocery terms, from farm to fork. Now, I had the great privilege, 30 years ago, unfortunately, of being taught by Professor Martin Christopher at Cranfield University, in fact twice. I did an MBA in Cranfield and also an MSc in Supply Chain Management and Logistics. And he wrote a glamorous book called Marketing and Logistics back in 1992. And the most profound thing that came out of that was a statement. In the future, and I think he might have been talking about now, companies won't compete, and hold your breath, but supply chains will. And I think that the pandemic has actually shown us all, both in the profession of supply chain management and also perhaps outside in the public, that supply chains actually do count. So we're going to talk about the broad area of supply chain, perhaps what retailers should be asking of themselves and of their partners, and perhaps we can wander into some of the specifics around grocery. Now, my agenda is broken into 3 bits. There's the recent past, the pandemic typically, the current, where we could make some big positive differences to how we perform in the marketplace, and also a glimmer into the future as to what a scalable supply network might look like. Please welcome, there's some seats at the front. Nobody wants them, they're always vacant. When we think about the recent past, and I don't really want to just talk about the pandemic, we've had some big challenges of how we've positioned the supply chain and the importance we attribute to it. Normally it's seen, certainly pre-pandemic, it was some blokes in the warehouse chucking a few boxes around and somehow that's the supply chain. And now with the disruption that we've encountered, the continuing accumulated disruption, and I say accumulated because we had the start of the restrictions And although certainly in Ontario we kind of opened up temporarily before we went back into, we never really recovered from that. And then we had lots of other things going on, which we never recovered from. So the cumulative effect of disruption has been building on top and building on top. If we go back 10, 15, 20 years to, say, 9/11, we had a big event, and then we recovered from it. And for a number of years, we had relative stability. We haven't enjoyed that same stability for the last 2 or 3 years. And is there an end in sight? I met the government back in October to talk to them about the vaccine distribution plans, and they didn't sound that organised, so I had to help to understand some of the handling attributes, the capacities in the market and things like that, and they went off in a slightly different direction. And I said back then, in what I knew about the virus, its impact, what was already going on in terms of disruption, and also that encounter, that we wouldn't be clear of this till summer 2022. And you can see it on LinkedIn. I got chased around the village with pitchforks. How dare you say that we've still got another 2 years ahead of us of this? We're just hoping next week we'll be in the new normal. I got to February this year, and I was doing a panel discussion for the RCC. And on the 24th of February, I was talking about disruption, and Michael LeBlanc, who was hosting it, said, well, who would have thought war would have broken out? And in light of that and various press conversations I had, I actually added another 2 years. So I think we're going to be in this confused state, this area of unprecedented, dare I use the word, of disruption for another 2 years. So we better get used to it. This is a new normal, and I would argue the new normal happened probably around March 2020, maybe before that. Don't want to spend too much time on just-in-time retail supply chains. They drive me mad. It's been an accident, a complete and utter accident, how as retailers we've looked to grow our business, and what we've done is we've added stores, we've added bigger stores, we've often, certainly if we're a mass merchant, we've ran more categories into those stores, and we've got to the diminishing point of returns. Therefore, we've matured in the market, and now we can only face one thing, which is decline. And we've got a number of tools and techniques. We can either just ignore it and just decline and hit the x-axis, or we can start, and this is the easy way to avert decline, is to cut costs or look for new ways of sourcing things much cheaper. And around 10, 15, 20 years ago, we discovered that actually they can do a lot of things cheaper in China. So we leapt to China, and we ended up having to plan our assortments on seasons out, and then having to send orders over for 9 months, 6 months, whatever it might be. And although it seems to arrive just in time in the store, we've actually got maybe 6 months worth of pipeline behind it. And we can operate like that when we're in a steady state where we know where the peak is, maybe pre-holidays or some other peak. But the pandemic has taught us that lots of things can change. Consumers can change very fast. They can change their category spending. They can change their channel. They can change their volumes. And it can catch out these apparently just-in-time retail systems. They can smash through them. And the other thing that I found incredibly amusing, and maybe it's because I wasn't actually actively involved at this time, was you couldn't read very much in March, April, May without 3 key words being in every article, either describing how we can become more agile, more resilient, and we can pivot all over the place, or describing companies who are telling members of the press they were pivoting, being resilient and being agile. And I would argue that the new normal, I think, happened in March. Our response to that was just a massive firefight. There have been some sort of glory out of this. And if you look at something like Peloton, who've had this meteoric rise to fame and have come crashing down as the restrictions eased up. But I actually think it's been a big word salad. And it remains a word salad, because the actual hard work of becoming agile, of all the groundwork that needs to be done on that, which we'll touch on later in my presentation, Is this not being done? Or if it's been done, it's been done in a tactical way rather than a strategic way. So this is a current. Now, of course, anybody in this room would say, of course, we want to join up what the consumers are doing in the marketplace in our investigation as to where the white space is that we can move in and exploit and be a trend setter. Of course, then that would lead us to buy the right stuff to put in our assortment so we're setting the pace in the marketplace. And of course, our logistics would just do what logistics do, supply chain. It would make sure the product was available at the right place at the right time, and often at the right price. But these things aren't joined up. The pandemic hasn't joined these things up. You might imagine that the pandemic was the burning platform to make sure that these three components are joined up, but remain in different silos. If you look at the larger retailers, have the logistics team, and maybe a VP or SVP of logistics or supply chain, but it's the physicality of a supply chain. The demand planning typically is in merchandising, and the market insights may or may not be part of even finance in terms of their analytical needs to actually crunch a lot of data. But we can say this for sure. We know Walmart, Target, Nike, now Gap, have all found themselves with a complete fracture in this process. And yet, if you think about Target and Walmart, some of the brightest people, the most adept ways of analysing structured and unstructured data using AI, except Amar's point earlier today that when we're in disruption, the last thing that works well is AI. Put that point aside, I agree with that. It didn't stop Walmart being overstocked. There was no guide rails from the marketing team or marketing insights team that said to demand planning, stop now, do something different, stop enticing suppliers to rush around on your behalf, make all this stuff, put it on that boat that you rented and get it to us because actually the consumers moved on. So I think that the big gold mine in today's world is trying to get these processes into horizontal alignment. And that means for retailers to actually break out from their silo thinking, to align these and to join up what is actually happening in the market, what's the white space, to make sure we do procure exactly the right stuff. And we need to find ways of not planning out 6-9 months, but planning out 3 or 4 weeks. Now, for people who are invested in a geographically extended supply chain, say with the Far East, that might be mind-blowing in some ways, but that we've got to start really focusing into the kind of what-ifs, that, trying to explore different ways of thinking. And the precision logistics or the supply chain is all about making sure that the movement of these goods, we have lots of optionality built into that so we can obviate disruptions as and when they occur. There's an interesting podcast, I may add. It's on my personal channel, RetailAID, where I had a number of experts work with me on what appeared to be the pack and hold strategy, which roots were reported in the Ottawa Citizen, claiming that this is a new strategy for them. But I think many mass merchants and specialty retailers are all thinking that we have got this burden of inventory, what do we do with it? If it's seasonal product, there is some degree of understanding of that, but this was Roots seasonless products, their hoodies and stuff. They were saying, we're overstocked, what do we need to do about it? Through the podcast, explored these joins, what stops them from working? Why have they got themselves in a difficult position? How can Walmart, with all the skills it has and access to enormous scale, how did it find itself it was overstocked? A glimmer into the future. I'm expecting some pin drop moments at some point because they always happen. But I developed a 10-step methodology of how we move forward. And just before I go into this, let me just step back into this. If we were able to organise this in a horizontal process and actually collaborate within our own internal structures. And when I talk about collaboration, I'm not talking about, having separate departments and having different incentive schemes and we're all sort of fight against each other internally. Of course, that wouldn't happen to any independent grocers, but it may do in the bigger chain stores. If we can't demonstrate and live collaboration internally, it's very hard to understand how we can really genuinely collaborate with suppliers. So if we just start with that base assumption, the rest might make more sense. So this 10-step methodology helps us to understand how we can scale our supply network. Now, we can scale it in a sense of we can go to, the problem resolution box is straightforward. We know that the thing isn't working, it isn't delivering quick lead times, it isn't allowing us to get in front of our customers, set trends. So we know we've got a problem. But typically retailers then go, right, we need to multi-source it. And you often hear words like reshoring, nearshoring, multi-shoring, friendly shoring. I'm sure there's a few other that I haven't captured in those moments. But their tactical response is to go and find new suppliers and use all the tools that we found the first supplier, which we concentrated on, and just use those tools for more suppliers, maybe some in Europe, maybe South America, maybe across the border, whatever it might be. And I say there's some groundwork here. So we understand what the problem is. We're not getting what we need from our supply network in terms of speed of response. So I think what we need to do is I'm not going to go through all 10 steps. I'm just going to go through the first bit to demonstrate the departure from what we have been doing over the pandemic and probably before. We need a multi-regime sourcing strategy because we need to develop that and then take it to the executive team for buy-in, because we're going to try and experiment on something that isn't comfortably done. First one is to share demand information, and that can be in itself quite challenging because normally, as retailers, we sit down and say, here's the forecast for next year, this is what we want you to do, get on with it, tell me what the price is. We're actually going to try a different thing, and that is we are going to share not only our demand information as it appears, we're not going to write over it our forecast. We're actually also going to share financial information, so we're going to move to an open book. And that is the catalyst for us to develop new contract structures to have much more open relationships with our supply network. Now, I believe Nike are moving slowly down this path, and it may have been triggered by the fact that they got themselves into an excess of inventory, and knowing that has been the outcome of how they've been thinking up to this point. So they had to change their thinking, and maybe they're following some parts of this model. But the 5 basic elements are problem recognition, doing the groundwork, doing the hard work. This is a bit that normally gets cut through and we just go straight to find new suppliers. Relatively easier if you're a strategic sourcing person. Then you go into your vendor negotiation with perhaps a different spirit, a different mindset. You have to find your suppliers who will be able to work with you in the way that you anticipate. Then you do the integration of suppliers and then the digitization of the whole end-to-end supply chain. Said very easily. I wrote an article back in February and it featured in Supply Professional. Never expected to be in that magazine, but there I am. So if you'd like to send me an email, I'll send you a link to it. It gives a bit more detail. There is a journey, and some of these are definite pin drop moments for people who have been brought up on a thinking that if we just concentrate our purchasing into one factory, one supplier, whatever it is, we're able to get over the minimum order quantities, we're able to squeeze them down. But if we look at apparel, I know we're talking to grocers here, but apparel manufacturing is probably done in just a very small handful of factories in China. We all think we're doing the right thing, but not only is it concentrated, so if there's a vulnerability in that factory, We'd only have to look back 8-10 years to what happened in Bangladesh. And also, we've got a huge distance between that factory and us and our stores. So there's a huge amount of risk. And one of the things I didn't touch on with the retail, just-in-time retail supply chains was not only was their design an accident, it just happened over time, but nobody actually really took much care about risks and actually managing those risks and putting in place mitigation actions. So the first thing here, I say price indifferent. Everyone goes, oh my, he means pay anything. No, I don't. Actually, quite the opposite. I mean, having a regulation within the contracts that within bands of production that you're taking, you'll pay the same unit price regardless. So the only thing that you need to focus on as a retailer is speed to market. How can you respond to that trend in the market as quickly as possible from the collaborative supply arrangements that you have? I mentioned before that the full disclosure of both demand and financial data on the basis that if we're going to collaborate, we really are in this together, as opposed to the only way I win is that you guys have to lose somewhere along the way. Another aspect of this is actually having the suppliers in the same room. So you can imagine I've got a supplier in Italy, in somewhere in North America, somewhere in the Far East, all sitting in the same Zoom room, and we're all looking at the same demand data, and we're all trying to get to the same conclusion. And the only variable in this is the capacity that exists within that network. Who's got the available capacity to make this and get it to me so I can put it on my shelves as quickly as I can? PO cancellations, one of the shocking things and rebounds from it was when I read about March 2020, was when Gap just cancelled millions and millions of purchase orders. And that had a rebound. The Vietnamese all got together and said, we're not dealing with them anymore. I don't know if that actually materialised, because if they've got nothing for their factory, then we're a bit stuck. But there was a reaction in the supplier community saying that no more cancelling orders. We've actually made the stuff. We've secured the resource. We've secured the materials to actually make this stuff, and we're running it through our production process, and they're just cancelling it. It's no good for Gap to turn around and go, we're not good for these anymore. And what we've got in our store, we're going to have to pack and hold. Another great strategy. So when we think about this scheme, we're actually all seeing a demand at the same time. And although, as a retailer, I might inadvertently write an order for 10,000 widgets, the supplier will be looking at the same demand data and say, well, I don't think that you need to do 10,000. I think it needs to be 1,000. And I'll secure the raw materials and the labour and the production capacity to do 1,000. But if we found ourselves in a difficult situation where we know that we're going to have to do massive markdowns, part of that massive markdown would be borne across the whole supply chain, not just with the retailer. And spot experimentation, we had to find out pretty fast if we were dealing, say, in the Far East. You know, how do we get on the plane really super fast, exposed to spot rates? Spot experimentation means trying different things in terms of, for instance, transport modes. How do we avert a piece of disruption that hasn't happened yet, but we need to test out the difference between sea and air, between road and rail, whatever it might be. Let's just plan those out and see what we need to do, what paperwork has to be done, what forms have to be filled out, how do we secure particular suppliers who are going to help us on those endeavours, and to keep those relationships working so they can be working with us when we experience disruption. And the target is the full end-to-end digitisation of the end-to-end supply chain. When we think as retailers, we might think the supply chain is within our four walls. We might actually then extend that to the first tier suppliers, but we want to get beyond that. We want to see where the raw materials are, at what stage they are, what capacities exist. Because if we can get to that, and there's no reason why we can't with cloud solutions, we could actually just run an algorithm over the whole thing and just manage exceptions rather than everything becomes a massive firefight. I've hit you with quite a lot of information, so I'm just going to summarise before we've got a few minutes for questions at the end. The new normal happened in March 2020. We're not going to a new normal, we're in it. But our only relief from this is we might have less disruption somewhere within the next 2 years, in which case we might have a chance to form some kind of equilibrium between supply and demand. I hope that you've seen in that methodology that we need to rethink what we're doing. We need to rethink with different ways of the problems that we have within the supply chain, within the wider retail ecosystem. When we were in March 2020, we just wanted to fight fires. When we got to summer of 2020, it was like, this is carrying on, isn't it? But we still were quite keen on fighting fires. 2020, 2021, still fighting fires. We're in 2022, we're approaching 2023. I watch quite a lot of webinars and read articles about it's going to be great. I've heard that argument in 2020, going into 21, 2021, going into 22. I'm hearing it again. What that is a substitute is meaningful action. And maybe that methodology or a variant around that methodology is the kind of materials that we need to be actively thinking about and actually doing something with. So we can't put off positive supply chain changes. I think the supply chain has certainly come up the pecking order of management priorities. There probably isn't a CEO or president that has a restful sleep every evening if they're relying on their supply chain to perform. But we're still seeing big white spaces between the supply chain and interest in actually wanting to do something about it. And there is a knowledge gap of how the complexity of the supply chain is actually created and how it could be managed in a different way. So any question, I'm just going to put this last slide up just in case you want to have a further conversation. I'm going to be around after the next session. But is there any questions? We've got a couple of minutes here, please.
Just give an example. You highlighted negotiation contracts. Like, can you give an example of what components that look different in a contract than previously?
It's all that we've done before, less the stuff that got in the way of us collaborating, but adding in collaboration. It's something which we don't necessarily put in contracts, but we have to find the wording, the sentiment to actually make sure that we're actually putting ourselves on the line when we're a retailer and wanting to disclose our internal financial information. So we need to form partnerships of basic trust. But we need to have that inside the contract so that everybody knows the penalties for stepping over. Back in the UK, we had Unilever and Procter & Gamble sharing the same warehousing network as an experiment until somebody said, Procter & Gamble are running a promotion. I thought you better know. And the whole thing collapsed. That can't happen. And we need to have as I say, wording in a contract, because we will be sharing factories with our competitors. That would be a natural consequence of people multi-sourcing. But we need to make sure that the people who we're dealing with come to us with that spirit of goodwill and collaboration. It's a bit nebulous at the moment because there's a lot of detail that can go behind that. Any other questions? So, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your organisation. You can connect with me via my website, RetailAID.ca, go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn and connect with me there. Please feel free to follow the experts on this podcast for more insights and to join in the conversation. I look forward to collaborating with you and playing an active part with your supply chain and business's transformation as you are inspired to think big, be bold, scale, adapt, and win.